Welcome to the Gottesdienst crowd, where we foster confessional integrity, liturgical preservation, and preaching that doesn't stink. We believe that the historic liturgy of the divine service is more than mere cobwebs of antiquity, but it is a true treasure of the Church, to be dusted off and brought down from her attic to be enjoyed. So let's get dusting.
Welcome back to the Gottesdienst crowd. This is Jason Braaten, your host. Today we have back with us Adam Koontz. Welcome back, Adam.
Hey, good to be with you.
So the last time we talked about how we need to start redrawing the lines between the sacred and the secular, that we need to begin thinking not in terms of sacred versus secular, but there are sacred things and then there are like anti-sacred things, right? Unholy things.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, there is no neutrality in life, such as maybe we thought 30 years ago.
Yeah. And I had been reading in the paper about how, so how do you end up redrawing those lines when basically everyone who's been raised, perhaps except for, maybe my generation and older, right? Everyone who's been raised has been raised with that type of thinking. And despite the fact that Gen Xers are, just kind of killjoys and curmudgeons, depending where on the spectrum that is, right? We still have this, it's almost like we still have this memory of what our world used to be. And we actually kind of want to get back there, even though we complain about how bad it was then. Does that make sense? It's like you can't make us happy.
It might. I don't know. Please continue to speak from your personal experience of shopping malls. I don't know. I mean, all of this is extremely foreign in the sense that I grew up in a part of America that's sort of the third world, and I didn't go to church. So 2020 felt fairly familiar to me. In that way. So, visions of, beautiful people at shopping malls before obesity was an epidemic in the United States, like that's all, that's fine. But I've only experienced it through media. So
yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, so that was, that's what we grew up with. When we went out on Friday night, you would walk around malls and you would drive in circles around town. And
that's time honored. Come on, that's time. I mean, I'm sure people did that in like chariots in ancient Britain. They drove around on Friday night, drinking probably illicitly. That's just time honored. That's well,
I'm a Scandinavian Lutheran, so I never did any of that.
Good. You guys are so nice.
We're pious, right? At least we want to make you think so. So in terms of grasping how vastly different things in our mind are from what we see, like reality.
Yeah.
How do we even begin I don't even know if you want to say rebuilding. How do you begin just rebuilding your area? So your home, your community, your church or church body, kind of concentric circles working out.
Sure.
How do you begin doing that when what you grew up with it was all in place, and so you have no idea how to build it? Does that make sense?
It does, because the verb that I would use is pioneer rather than rebuild.
Yeah, there you go.
Because rebuilding presumes maybe foundations or a model that is extant and usable. Much of that is not true, because whatever you grew up with and whatever your parents and maybe even your grandparents grew up with was attuned to a completely different set of social and political circumstances. What I mean by that, for example, is that your grandparents could go to a public place and express disgust at an effeminate man and not worry about it, much less the church. Okay. where now that is a kind of preaching that you would have to explain sort of calmly and at length. And you can't just kind of offhanded. I mean, you can do whatever you want, but if you just offhandedly condemn whatever in the most drastic possible terms, that's fine. It just may not be that anyone will end up agreeing with you. Your rhetoric has to take account of the fact that almost nobody is reflexively in agreement with the church's teachings or practices anymore.
Yeah. Okay. So are there overlaps to what the pioneers were earlier in our kind of understanding?
Yeah.
In America, Lutheranism in America, or just Lutheranism in general, or Christianity, what are the virtues that need to be instilled? And maybe first we need to talk about what exactly we mean by virtue.
Yeah. Well, what we mean by virtue, I'm going to work not with a philosophical definition, but sort of with a historical definition, where it means the capacity, let's say it that way, the capacity to be a man. Mm-hmm. They are the things characteristic of a man. And the recognition here is that one of the differences between the sexes is that women sustain life in a biological sense, men sustain life in a civilizational or political sense. Right. Both are obviously necessary, but they are different realms. And so the things that belong to virtue are characteristics, that is, observable things about oneself or about other men that nonetheless have to be impressed or stamped on you, generally through experience. And like we talked about last time, especially the experience of pain. Mm-hmm. And that on a literal level is true through physical exertion, work, sports, which historically are always linked to the capacity for warfare. Mm-hmm. It could be literal pain. It could be spiritual or psychological pain, such as basically anybody who is good with words or music or painting will generally, if you know them or read about them, will have experienced. So pain is necessary to virtue. Virtue is the capacity to behave in a way fitting for a man. So in that sense, it's not really like, I think maybe sometimes people think about virtues as sort of like an expansion pack. Like I'm going to acquire more of them, or I might want more of them. They are simply necessary. And if they are not present, or if virtue, let's say broadly as a set of characteristics, is not present, then what you're really dealing with is a man who is biologically male, but not spiritually male. Mm. And to me, that is the actual crisis, apart from the decline of the American shopping mall or the shrinkage of our churches or something. The actual crisis is that you have biological males who are not spiritually men. And that destroys anything very quickly.
Yeah. Okay. So what makes someone spiritually a man?
Yeah. It would be the possession and then the exercise of virtue. So, for instance, if he attained his position with very little pain or sacrifice in life, whatever it is that he is or prides himself upon being, it could be formal and official, or it could be informal. Whatever that is, let's say that he defines himself by his sports fandom. Well, obviously, no pain has been required there, because he just buys the jersey or whatever and then watches, whatever it is, the game, the match.
I mean, unless you're a Cubs fan.
Right. Yeah. I guess that would inculcate virtue or something. I don't.
No, it probably doesn't. I'm a Cubs fan, but
isn't it worse to be a White Sox fan? Haven't they won even less? I don't know.
No, they've won more, I think.
They've won more. Okay.
And more recently.
Okay. Okay.
But we did have one glorious year,
Yeah. Well, there you go. They're both in Illinois, so there's pain. But that is, he is basing I think often the word identity is used in this sense, and that could be okay. But talking specifically about being a man, he has not been put through, nor is he putting himself through any processes that would require greater strength, wisdom, agility, whatever is needed through some process of change and suffering. And because of that, he is defined by the comforts that he enjoys in the positions that he's attained without pain.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's the majority of modern America.
Yeah, well, because we are certainly trained. I mean, apart from anything else that you want to say about feminization, the definition of success or enjoyment of life as a certain, various kinds of passivity, that just eviscerates, disembowels, emasculates men, because men cannot be defined by what they, go through or something. And they have to be defined by what they became through what they go through. And if what they're going through asks nothing of them, then they will have become nothing.
Yeah. So in this, so in what sense, I should ask, is what men are naturally inclined to be, because of testosterone or whatever those things are, and how much needs to be formed, and in other words, what kind of atrophy goes along with the failure to go through that pain?
Yeah. I think that, often and most internet rhetoric surrounds what is outwardly visible about biological males who are failing to be men. So, that they're flabby, or they're full of soy, or they're consuming this and that's bad, or they're not doing that and that's bad. And that is indicative of something, right? It is indicative of the interrelationship between one's biology and one's inclinations, habits, and life. That is a unity in the human being that needs to be recognized. On the other hand, you also have to recognize that the feedback loop there between the ways of the body and then the ways of the spirit doesn't just flow from, okay, the body is being misused, maltreated, fed poorly, whatever, but also that the spirit affects the body. And in this way, the crisis, I think, is primarily a spiritual crisis, right? Not solely, but primarily. So for instance, if I meet, a 15-year-old kid who is depressed and whatever else, his body is still pushing him to become a man, right?
Yes.
And he will get taller, and he will want to, find a girl, and he'll want to do lots of things that men want to do. Without spiritual guidance or development, though, that will be turned in very strange directions, right? And that will also be warped, or some of it will never be developed because, for instance, to give you an example, we will have appealed to the wrong things in boys and in men. So the example being, really heavy porn usage at all, right? But especially the kind that the guy himself would describe as addictive. Okay, what's the problem here? Well, sometimes we try to get boys to stop looking at porn by virtue of saying to them, like, this is, this is involved with human trafficking, which, let's be honest, is extremely abstract as a concept for most of us.
Yeah.
Or this is, this mistreats women. Okay, again, like fairly abstract for this boy who just was given internet access when he shouldn't have been.
Right.
Appealing to, you look stupid. This is a stupid thing. This makes you weak. This makes you flabby and lazy. Those are things that, if you've ever coached sports, are very easily appealed to in boys because they don't want to be shameful, and they want to develop, and they want to be stronger, or they at least know that they should want to. Yeah. So when you're thinking about, okay, biologically, this is going to be happening, psychologically, this is going to be happening, but spiritually, all of that needs to be developed in the right way. And if it's simply, and I mean, this to me is the tragedy of a lot of the boys who sit in our congregations every Sunday. They're getting a sermon that's sort of attuned to the feelings of, women 45 years older than they are.
Yeah.
And they are not really given any instruction concretely or an example in the pastor of how to be a man who is, for example, decisive rather than controlled by his emotions or the emotions of other people. And so this is, it's just, I love those boys. I love those young men. And the tragedy is that I don't think that we are investing enough in them or taking seriously the idea that, male headship is not just like something you drag out as a talking point when you want to say why we don't ordain women.
Yeah.
It may actually be the way creation is shaped. So that 15-year-old is in 10 years, at the very least, supposed to be exercising some kind of headship. You have to train him for that. You have to give him guidance. And if he doesn't have that, who knows what's going to happen to him?
All right. So how, kind of tracking back then, how do you begin to inculcate that when you have probably multiple generations who haven't not had it inculcated in them?
Yeah. Yeah. If you're listening to this, you need to just start doing it yourself in any way that you can, because I don't have any other hope. I'm not waiting for, a Concordia or the Synod or something to be like, hey, let's be real. Let's talk about this real thing. It's too late for that to wait. And it doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter. We could have a bunch of guys, pass resolutions about this, and that would be great. I would support them. I would probably even, speak for them publicly, whatever. It just doesn't matter. Right. The idea that somehow, the locus of Christianity is the local congregation, or the highest office in the church is the pastor. That is like a kind of a lying talking point that we hear often in church circles. But guess what? The reason it's true is because it's the only place that you can actually reach a 15-year-old boy.
Yeah.
You're not going to reach him through a resolution, something that has its own kind of slogan and associated, advertising, colors and logos and word marks produced by some official thing. It doesn't matter. You, if you are listening to this, can reach that kid right now and need to give him a sense of accomplishing things in life. None of this is rocket science. You don't have to know how to fix everything on your car. Right. Why don't, if you know how to change your oil, why don't you just show the kid how to change his oil? It's it's not rocket science, because we don't need to offer everyone like a classical education, an HVAC certification, the capacity to fix his own car, and the capacity to grow all his own food tomorrow. We just need him to develop in some way as a man who can grow in confidence and godly humility. That's it.
Yeah.
But it has to be done intentionally.
Yeah. There has to be you have to want to develop those things.
Yeah.
So then what are the things obstructing, or the excuses that we use that obstruct men now from doing it?
One might be a sense of one's own inadequacy, which is fine, but shouldn't be an impediment to doing something, to teaching, to taking somebody under your wing. Because if you teach anyone anything, you will have a deep sense of your own inadequacy if you're doing your job.
Yeah, exactly.
So that's just the way it goes. You will realize how stupid you are when you have to teach other people. That's just the way that life is. But another impediment would be the sense that things that cannot be captured in terms, in quantitative terms, programmatic terms, or would not necessarily be done sort of during working hours, would not be worthwhile. That is, if I'm not going to be recognized for it, which I won't, right? And it's not getting me anything sort of, church politically for a pastor, or it's not going to get me a promotion at work. If I, sell farm equipment or whatever it is that I do for a living, these are the kinds of things that you should be doing with your sons, and with other people's sons when and where you can. But no one's going to recognize you for it. Like, no one's going to be like, Jason Braaten is the expert at, helping other, helping kids not be so depressed all the time. Right. That's not, Sin is not going to give you an award for that. So so who cares? Right. But these are the kinds of things. I have always thought about this ever since I first began going to church. And I was very affected by the Sermon on the Mount immediately, even though I had no understanding of what I was reading. It was just sort of the force of the words. But the idea that the hidden life, right, that's kind of Paul's phrase, but this life which is seen only by the Father is the actually worthwhile one. I don't know why we don't take that more seriously. We take very seriously the idea that this person has these degrees or has written this or done that or whatever. And those things are fine, but in view of eternity, they really cannot possibly matter that much. Certainly not as much as, here's a 15-year-old that because you did this for him, he kept going to church and then, he goes to heaven one day. Okay. And the family that he had, since he didn't waste his whole life with video games and porn because you set him on this path. There really is absolutely no way to say how invaluable that is. It's just that you're not going to get rewarded for it. But that's exactly what the Sermon on the Mount says.
Yeah. All right. So basically you just have to do it. There's no delay. Dive in, find out that you really are a walking example of the Dunning-Kruger syndrome, and learn from that.
Yeah.
So is this an example of iron sharpening iron? Just like you just get in and do it, and you will see your own failures and weaknesses, and that will make you better. And because your students, or, in a specific case, your children, anyone that you have to teach anything to, but just specifically about children, your children will teach you how stupid you are, or how lacking. And I see this in kind of at least two different ways. One is when I realize that just concretely, I don't know what I'm doing, or I don't know what to say, or I don't know how to handle this situation. The other one is, especially when they reflect the worst things about me, because they are, unfortunately for them, carrying my genetic material. Yeah. So those kinds of things, those experiences of humility are precisely, dying to self is not, I think, just about suffering magnificently at certain times. It is also about the changes that are induced by following your vocation. And your vocation, if it's worthwhile, is actually focused on people. Even if it's a job that doesn't have anything to do with people, it's for the people that you are supporting, that you love, who are, married or, were born from you, whatever the case may be. It's all for people. So when you think of it that way, then it's always a humbling experience, because when you're dealing with another, child of God, you're always dealing with someone who has this sort of mysterious weight about him, because God has chosen to bring that person who is not you into his eternal life in Christ. And that is a fearful thing to handle, but it is a wonderful thing to get to be part of. This is why people become pastors, but it really is true for any Christian who is involved in the life of God's people, whether in his own family or the church broadly, is that you get to deal with people who are, and this is Lewis's point on this sort of question, you're dealing with immortals. Mm-hmm. So you need to take seriously not just that you need to get this done or this is what's scheduled or whatever, but that when you're dealing with other human beings, especially, your own children or the children of the congregation, you're dealing with people who are destined to live in eternity, either in accursedness or through God's grace in blessedness. And that really, I think, puts everything into perspective. I just don't. I just started thinking about this as, what should I be doing with my life if I have been at enough deathbeds to realize that no one asks to be surrounded by his money, his degrees, his
publications, his whatever he prided himself on, it's always other people.
Yeah.
That's all they're looking for. That's all they're looking for. And that's not a piece of sentimentality. That is the realization that other people are the only thing you're encountering in this life that you will also encounter in eternity.
Yeah, that is a great point. No one ever asks to be surrounded by those things. So you're saying then invest in other people.
Yeah. What else is there?
Yeah.
Everything else is proximate, secondary, servile to the idea of keeping souls in Christ. That's what everything else is for, and has to be subordinated to. I understand that is not, quote, how the world works, but that's because that's not how the world works. but we who are in Christ do not work that way, because Christ didn't come into the world to be famous or rich or, be an eminent bureaucrat or some other horrible thing.
Yeah. So essentially, this begins with a change in the attitude of the one who ascends the pulpit.
Yeah, I think it does. It does.
So really, as like shepherds and leaders, they have to really begin to believe what they preach in such a way that, that like Easter really does change everything, and that we are going to live forever. And that means that what happens now is actually of utmost importance.
It is. Yeah, it is. And I do not understand how a man in a place, however obscure, doesn't understand this about what he's doing in the pulpit, also at the altar. I really do not understand. I get it from the perspective of this life, when someone says, I haven't, gotten to, I've never been a delegate to a synod convention, or I haven't gotten to Fort Wayne in a long time. I'd love to get back, or whatever, whatever Vatican-like entities we have. Right.
Yeah.
But from a Christian perspective, I don't understand that at all. If you are near people, then in your congregation, in your town, whatever, then you are near eternity just as much and maybe closer to it and its realities than anyone who is discussing anything concerning whatever is going on in Vatican-like entities is, because those things are passing. Right. And when Paul, the closer Paul gets to death, right, whether you think about the captivity letters or you think about that glorious retrospective that he does on his life and ministry in 2 Corinthians,
yeah,
the closer he gets to saying, all of this is going away. Okay. The things that are not going away are not even, the buildings that these congregations are using in Corinth or Philippi or whatever. The things that are not going away are the people who are in Christ, whom he has either brought there as a father or whom he is seeking to sustain through his travels and fundraising. So this doesn't mean like do nothing, just sit there and write really good sermons. It means that do everything that you possibly can, right? But everything that you possibly can is done for specific people, souls for whom Christ died. And that is simple, basic, foundational, seemingly stupid. But when we don't orient our lives around those realities, we always get into things that will prove to be, I think, just useless, just totally useless. How much energy has been expended on programs nobody remembers, and somebody probably got fired from a job once, because he didn't produce, programming materials correctly or on time or something, for something that no one remembers anymore, that raised money for something no one cares about. I just don't want to live day to day in a way that is not eternally meaningful.
Yeah. So is there, in the vast scheme of things, is it start where, where your personality allows? Just start there, or is there in your mind a place to start? Does that make sense?
Yeah, the place to start is with an understanding of what it is that you have, speaking specifically to pastors, what it is that you have gotten into this for. Because it has to be finally for the sake of being a fisher of men. That's the option here. That's the single option. If you don't click on that box, you can't go to the next screen. So you have to click on that box. And when you click on that box, that means that you are doing this out of a love reflective of Christ for the souls of men. I think that will put all the other stuff that you are either called to do or at some point or another feel you have to do into much greater perspective. I don't really understand why pastors complain. I was going to use a worse word than that. Complain so much. You have the absolute greatest job in the world. You never have to wake up and think, is this eternally meaningful? The only thing better than that I've found in life is being a father, and nobody pays me to do that. So, right. I mean, what really do you have to complain about? Everything else is a fleeting problem. It's passing, like Paul says in 2 Corinthians. It's passing. And I love the idea that, the proper preface for Christmas teaches you, right. The marvel of the incarnation is so that you can begin to love those things which are not seen.
Not seen, right.
Yeah.
Okay. So, starting there, at least with pastors, they can't ignore either the living room or the dining room table. I mean, how often is a congregation or just shot because a pastor hasn't focused on his family?
Yeah. Yeah. And how much regret surrounds that too. And, and what is it really worth? I mean, what were you doing that was so desperately important, and what came out of it? And I think that concerns thinking about churches as little kingdoms, that you are by and by perfecting, right? And so the guy who is willing to say, well, I'll wait 10 years, thinks himself a wiser man than the guy who obviously is changing everything too fast, or whatever the case may be. And there is a sense in which he is wiser, but there is also a wisdom that is still wiser than the 10-year guy, which recognizes that even if he's here for 45, one day he won't be. And that will bring into perspective for him the sense of what will be important, and thus what is now important. The example of the pastor's family, which is something that we have, the Eastern Orthodox have, Anglicans have, Presbyterians have. It's going to be a little different in traditions that don't have sort of a state church tradition, where the pastor's family had this sort of social distinction from other families that may or may not still be the case in different places. But just to understand, and this is the way that Leah talks about it in his pastoral theology, is that they are a kind of model church. And one thing that I utterly despise is hasting to confess, I think insincerely, how bad you are at certain things before you've even tried. So what I mean by that is, you say, well, the pastor's family isn't perfect. I know that. The Bible knows that. God knows that. It doesn't, that no one's asking you to be perfect in every way all of the time. Mm-hmm. We're just asking you to do devotions more often than you do. I mean, there is a way of, we have such a knack of evading the real for the sake of things that are piously unreal. Yeah. Such as the idea that the pastor's either perfect or therefore he has excuse to, just watch Netflix schlubbily like everybody else and not improve himself. I do not understand. I don't understand the reflex. I don't understand the reflex. Why not try first before you talk as if you're an expert about how hard something is? I mean, I don't know anything about driving trains. Never done it. Don't know how. Barely know anything about trains. So I'm not going to talk to you for the next, half hour or however much we have remaining about how hard driving trains is. I can talk to you about doing family devotions when the kids are squirming and like one of them like just runs off, which toddlers are especially prone to do. Toddlers are sort of natural thieves or something. They're like monkeys. They just run, So I have practical suggestions about, what to do about that. Why? Because I've actually tried. So if you are trying, then you also can talk with humility and realism to your people about doing these things. Mm-hmm. If you're not trying, don't ask them to do it. Don't ask them to do it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's just, everyone's going to figure out that it's fake or you don't really know what you're talking about. I mean, we've all bluffed. So we know exactly what it's like when you're talking and you don't know what you're talking about.
Right.
So, and because one really good way to, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah. It's like teaching the, fifth chief part without ever having gone through it.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. You don't know what, it may be hard to say what is actually wrong with you. Mm-hmm. So here are some ways to avoid being random or just talking about how your mother wasn't the mother she should have been. Whatever difficulties people have. And the other thing here is this will induce actual humility rather than professed humility, right? I mean, I think it sounds humble to say nobody's perfect. We don't pray like we should. We don't read the Bible like we should. And that is a rhetorical move that will be convincing to a certain number of people all of the time. But for most people will only be convincing at first. And then they'll figure out that the reason that you put like prayer and Bible reading together as examples of things that are hard is because you yourself don't do them. I mean, people are not dumb. So you will be able to talk more, I think, coherently and realistically about, okay, well, why don't you read half a chapter or why don't you read a chapter and do it in this fashion or whatever, because you have tried and yourself failed. This is where, I mean, one of the big misunderstandings about manhood that I think our culture has is that the reason it's toxic is because strength is toxic and strength somehow is just arrogant, right? Mm-hmm. Strength, on the other hand, is fruitful because it's what makes other forms of life possible. It protects them. It guards them. And strength is also humble because it has to be gained. You don't just wake up one day and you just know the whole Bible or have a great physique, whatever it is that you need to get better at.
I don't have any of those.
Whatever it is, you need to work at it. And so that's what actually creates the search for strength creates humility, right? A false humility is born out of an actual weakness, and I think a despising of strength and probably an envy of strength.
Yeah. Well, there's a whole lot of envy. I mean, that's like the virtue or vice du jour, envy. I mean, I think it explains a whole lot.
Yeah.
I mean, the fact that we can't, rejoice when someone else does well.
Right.
That is just, I mean, that's what I don't get. I don't get when, someone does something well and then I mean like in our circles.
Yeah.
I'm not meaning like in the world or on television or anything like that.
Yeah.
But in our circles that, someone does something well.
Right.
And there's like this immediate pile on of kind of weird detraction.
Yeah. Yeah. And that is definitely necessary out of there is a cruelty to weakness. There is a cruelty that weakness has because it has two very enormous problems at the same time. One is it is slothful and doesn't want to change.
Yeah.
The other is that it knows that it should, and it knows what would be better. And especially when what would be better is not just abstractly conceived, but recognized in another man's efforts, in another man's strength. That's when weakness really desires to punish strength, because it can see what is desirable, good, true, strong, becoming, and it hates it for existing, right? It just hates it. And
because it's a reminder of what they're not.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah,
exactly. And there is an arrogance in that weakness that can sound like strength, because it can be very boastful. I was talking to Peterson, and he said, he goes about this one guy. He goes, he thinks he should have every call. Do you have a tiny failing congregation in Western Kansas? I can fix it. Do you have a giant institution with an enormous budget? I can steer it well. You know what I mean? Like, just, you'd be an expert at anything, which, just is patently absurd. But the reason that people can behave that way and then talk that way, as if they're an expert on this and they're an expert on that and they're an expert on what this guy should be doing. The reason for that is that they're weak. Strong men would not talk that way, because they would understand, I know how to do this well. And I've actually worked to do it. Since I haven't done the work, I don't know how to do that well. I've never brought that kind of a congregation back from the dead. I had this and I managed it well and whatever, but I don't know how to do that. Maybe I can learn, but I don't know how to do it. So I'm obviously not going to disparage the guy that is doing that.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there really also needs to be a pretty solid effort within at least the ministerium of guys talking to other guys, and for lack of a better way of saying it, just being real with them and saying, stop doing that.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. I mean, something that
we don't need to be it's like we're in pissing contests with each other.
Always.
Yeah.
Because, and I think, maybe maybe not enough of us had brothers or something. I don't know. Or our brothers we were bad at being brothers. I don't know. But something that I stress with the guys here in field education is the cultivation of brotherhood, because brotherhood keeps you humble. There are guys that I went to seminary with that I talk to, at least, via text. Not voice, but text every day. Mm-hmm. And they all know that I don't know what I'm doing in X and Y and Z situation. And I know the same about them in situations A, B, and C. And that's, so I don't have to go through a day where I'm not reminded that I'm not like the all sufficient answer to this problem and that problem and this other problem, because I have these other guys. And they're not even, I don't wake up and get a text like, Koontz, you're really bad at chanting. A true confession, right? I know that, and they know that, right? So, no worries, right? Not good at that. Bad, very bad. So those kinds of things require you to, be realistic about what is happening and what is wrong. And also what you're good at, what would be optimal or helpful, or what you could help them with. And that's all much healthier than being like, every once in a while when I go to a circuit meeting or I go to a district convention or I go to Bugenhagen and, drink the Wisconsin beer. And then I tell everybody all the amazing stuff I did, since the last time I saw other pastors. That's just silly.
Yeah.
We all know it's 75% of it's true and 25% of it is charitably stretched.
Yes.
So
unless you're just a really great storyteller, then I'm okay with it.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, if you do it in an entertaining way, I don't care if it's a lie.
Yeah, right.
But just cut down on your stretching, and brothers will help with that.
Mm-hmm. What about the average guy in the pew? Where does he start?
Yeah, the average guy in the pew is just going to start. He's going to start in the congregation. Because no less than the pastor, his primary life is in Christ. It's not at work. Mm-hmm. From there, from the church, And if he lives, with members of the church, that is his family, then he's going to start there even more specifically because they are in Christ and he has primary responsibility for them. But he's going to begin in the church and then live his life out of the fact that he's baptized. He will therefore pursue excellence in whatever it is that he's been given to do, but he will do that as a baptized man of God. He will not do that as if here's how things work in church and here's how he's nice to people in church, and then he's a complete sociopath at work, or he contravenes his conscience constantly at work, but that's okay because it's left-hand kingdom. No, he's a Christian everywhere he goes, and he is, first of all and primarily and eternally only, a baptized man of God. So he needs to live out of that. We as pastors need to give him space in the church to live out of that, right? The church should not be a place where only the pastor gets to be a man.
Yeah. Well, that's, I don't remember who I was talking to. But we were talking about how you don't need every man to be the man.
Yeah.
You just need one.
Yeah.
And I kept saying, look, if you have one man, like who can, hold his own,
right,
and knows things, knows what he knows and knows what he doesn't know, can step forward and speak, man, that changes everything.
It does. It does. Yeah. And guys like that can change congregations that don't even have a pastor right now. Simply by example, let alone as a support to a faithful pastor. That is astounding when you do have that or when you find that. Yeah.
Because it really does also help to draw out other men,
right?
Like to make other men be men.
Yeah. Yeah, that's right. I think that if you think about not just being biologically male, but this virtue, this being a man, becoming what you are intended to be, then you have to recognize that it is something that requires cultivation. And that's not just true for you individually. That's also true for a group of men, the men of the congregation, the pastors of the circuit, the pastors of the district, the men who are making decisions for the church at large. If they are not called into pain, sacrifice, battle, and then supported in pain and sacrifice and battle, they will, of course, revert or slink down into a form of life, though they are biologically male, that would be understandable for a woman whose desire is to be protected, and to be helped. They have to be called to manhood, even if they are biologically male. That has to be developed, right? Virtue is something that is always being developed and also has to be demanded. And when it's not demanded, you will get entire organizations run by biological males that still function in characteristically passive, very cautious ways that are very understandable and natural to women whose primary responsibility is not to suffer enormous pain or lay down their lives. It is for them to nurture the life that they have born. And so, of course, they're cautious and safe, and because God has set it up such that those who are cautious and safe, who nurture life, will be protected by those who make war.
Right. Yeah, exactly. And so we are living in a time where that which rules is the cautious and safe.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no question at all. And that is, I think, in a way that is sort of hard to express for anybody, even my age, and certainly upward, is that young boys have grown up deeply feminized and made to be passive in crippling and crushing ways. And so there will be an awkwardness there in their growth into manhood that maybe wasn't there for you because the world was slightly or a lot less dysfunctional. But just recognize that their change will be harder and maybe delayed, and that those things simply need to be accounted for as you're guiding young men.
So kind of to wrap some of this up, and maybe this is a longer question, but so who do you look to as someone now as those pioneers? Like, so if you're not around anyone, whose biographies can you read?
Yeah.
Who are the guys who have done things that you can read about to emulate? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it totally makes sense. I would suggest biographies of actual pioneers. There are lots of journals. Daniel Boone wrote a book about his life. These are actually available. And for example, for kids especially, there's the Little House series, which tellingly people know about, and that's great.
Farmer Boy, right?
Yeah, the Farmer Boy is, because of what we've been talking about, my favorite one.
Yeah.
In addition to that is one that's more specifically about boys, which is a series by Ralph Moody, usually called Little Britches.
Oh yeah, those are great books.
Those are great books. So especially for boys, that is a way of understanding, growing up, pain, labor as necessary, and how that grows you, how that shapes you. Mm-hmm. Specifically for pastors, I would say there is a biography available in English, and then also the pastoral theology that I mentioned earlier of Wilhelm Leah. And the reason that I commend Leah is because if you read Leah's pastoral theology, you will consistently find he was, for lack of a better word, real. He talks about real things, dynamics between older men and younger men, the pastor's family, extremely insightfully, what is actually necessary in preaching and what can be left behind, why you need to grasp principles of liturgy and not just actions of liturgy in the section on liturgics. Mm-hmm. All kinds of things that are not so much about the tasks that you carry out as the kind of a man that you are. And you can see that in his biography, which is largely about a man who is extremely talented, extremely gifted, but suffers mightily because he is going against the tide of his times in the state church, in the state, because he's ruled over by a Roman Catholic king in the Kingdom of Bavaria, and is therefore, they think, saddled with this extremely obscure rural parish. And he's from a city, he's never lived in the country before. And they think, good riddance to bad rubbish. And he flourishes there, starts all kinds of things from there without ever having left. So, if you think that you have it difficult, try this guy. And he perseveres through a kind of determination and clarity, I think, too, you'll see in his pastoral theology about what is actually needful and what kind of attitude should you have toward people. And he has very close observation, for example, of, he doesn't actually think that anyone should do a vicarage in a city because you don't actually know your people, because you don't know the people that they actually live with. Mm-hmm. He says only the country pastor truly knows his people because he knows the entirety of their lives. Although another piece of close observation is he says country people are much more reticent and maybe not even as capable as city people of expressing themselves clearly about what they feel and what they think. And they don't need to tell you because you're not from there. So they're not going to anyway, even if they could. So it's all, I grew up.
Wow, that is insightful.
Yeah. So he's got, his primary orientation, to kind of go back to something we said closer to the beginning, his primary orientation is to what is actually occurring with people in their lives. And then therefore, what should he do? Not what does he want to do that would be preferable in his mind, sort of abstractly anywhere, generally. Now, he changes a great deal about that parish, pushing for very frequent communion relative to really anywhere else in 19th century Germany, for example. But those things are governed by basic pastoral principles and this basic orientation toward people and what is necessary for their souls. That's why the frequency of communion, that I think is it's immensely clarifying.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Any other things, or just start from there?
I think start from there, but I also think that the knowledge of biographies, and then also surrounding yourself with visual examples. This is what the Romans would do. That the knowledge of the past was not only the knowledge of events, a timeline, battles, political happenings, but also very concretely the images of one's ancestors all around you in your home. So in your home, where you work, in your office, your study, if you're a pastor, these are places to surround yourself with visual examples of fortitude or difficulty or beauty or whatever it is that needs to change you. Do not underestimate all the parts of yourself that are subconscious and irrational. And I don't mean that, disparagingly. I mean that people are motivated by things that are very, very, very deep that we would all have trouble explaining. So you're going to access those parts of yourself better through art, music. Be very careful about what you listen to and how much you listen. Those parts of you can be changed very radically by what surrounds you visually, aurally, and so on. So those are things to think about. What am I looking at? What kind of environment am I in? It's not just making things, prettifying things. It is understanding that you live also through your eyes and your ears.
No, that's very helpful. We're not just walking minds.
Yeah, right. None of us is. It doesn't matter how smart you think you are. You're not a walking brain. You're just not. Yeah. Because you're a human being. So you have all these other components. Some of them may be dull, right? You may not understand what is happening in your own mind and just sort of, just spew facts about Star Trek or whatever to return to our last conversation. But, whatever the case may be, just, taking a shot in the dark.
Monocles, bowlers.
Yeah, monocles, bowlers.
Sticks.
Right, exactly. Doctor Who reruns. But whatever that is, that's coming out of a deeper place, out of the fullness of the heart, the mouth speaks.
Yeah. Well, thanks for your time. I really appreciate this. This was great to walk through that. What's coming up for Symposia?
So as we record this, I'm giving a paper on Tuesday of Symposia in the afternoon. The general theme for the exegetical symposium is theology of the body, something like that. Male and female, he created them, I think it might be called. I'm doing a paper on human fertility and how it is discussed biblically. So it's going to be fun, is what it is. It's written. I had a great deal of fun writing it, and I'm going to have fun delivering it.
Yeah, I don't know if I'd say that would be fun.
Oh no, I love situations in which I realize I'm saying something that probably 65% of us already acknowledge, but nobody is talking about. This is absolute. Like you couldn't tear me away from this with wild horses. So
yeah. I always think of, when I have to do something like that, I always think of the people in my pews and how they would hear this.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, man, that'd be hard to say.
Oh yeah.
There are a lot of times when you've got to say these things, but just there are certain people that I think they would be looking at me like I've got a head growing out of my ear.
Yep. That's right. Yeah. And I would obviously not say it all in one big gulp to, a congregation. But laying out a chain of logic. And I do think one thing that I think brothers would be doing if we were actually the brothers that we say we are is challenging each other.
Yeah.
Rather than just saying whatever is the most, asinine possible thing that could be said or inoffensive possible thing that could be said. Just in order to, stir the pot in a way that doesn't matter at all, or to, say just mouth platitudes about, babies are good and we're against abortion, and leave it there, which is kind of where we are. So I want to push people a little bit, not because I enjoy pushing people, even though maybe I do, but because it's something that needs to be discussed. So I said, hey, why not?
Yeah. Well, good. I will not be there to hear it, but I will most certainly try to tune in at some point so I can.
Yeah. Yeah. Maybe they'll hear about it.
Yeah. That way they won't hear me laughing as you're doing it.
So we'll see if I smirk or not as I'm delivering some of it. But yeah, no, it'll be fun. It'll be great. So
good.
Yeah.
Well, thanks for your time, Adam. Blessings next week, and don't stay up too late.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks a lot.
All right, bye.